economy. Well, let's talk now to Megan Green, who is a Euro crisis economist and is standing by in our central London studio. Megan, thanks so much for joining us here on BBC News. I mean, how important has this vote been? Is this vote in terms of obviously Greece getting the next batch of money from the EU and the IMF?
As you mentioned, this vote was crucial, but I'm certainly not breathing a sigh of relief just yet. Next week, the Parliament will have to vote on the medium-term plan, and it's not certain that will pass, though I think it probably will. And after that's passed, then the Parliament will have to take 3 days to pass the implementation legislation. So at the earliest, we might see the medium-term plan passed on July 1st. And that's important because on July 3rd, the Eurogroup will be meeting to come up with the terms of the second bailout for Greece. So there isn't a whole lot of wiggle room for the Greek Parliament. There aren't that many days that the Greek Parliament can really play with or kick the can further down the road to get this medium-term program passed. And even if it's passed, no one's really asked whether it's possible to implement the terms of it, and the answer to that is no, it's not possible to implement the terms of it. So the government's kicked the can a bit further down the road, but come September, when the Troika's back in Athens to see, how much progress Greece has made on meeting the terms of its bailout, we're going to find ourselves exactly back in this position where Greece hasn't made any more progress and where there's massive public opposition to more austerity.
It's almost like the government's stuck between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, as we can see here, people demonstrating against these austerity cuts, a huge amount of opposition amongst the people of Greece to what the government is trying to do. But on the other hand, we have the EU, which to some degree wants to save face. It wants to help Greece get out of the situation it's in, but it has to force Greece in a way to push through even more severe austerity measures than it already has.
Well, that has been the plan so far. Of course, that's not the only way that the EU could actually help Greece. In fact, the only way to fundamentally solve this problem is to start writing down some of the debt. Greece simply has too much debt. It's unsustainable. So debt restructuring is inevitable at some point.
There are some people who argue that Greece should just be allowed to default on its debt. Where do you stand?
Well, Greece currently has a primary deficit, so if it were to default on its debt now, it would lose access to any official funding, and it would need money immediately just to run the government. So it would either have to leave the Eurozone to devalue its currency, or it would have to stop paying all of its public servants, which is sort of a recipe for civil unrest and civil war. So if Greece were to default right now, it would end up having to leave the euro. And furthermore, it hasn't actually implemented many of the structural reforms that are stipulated in the bailout program and that are necessary to rebalance the economy. So Greece would find itself outside of the Eurozone with no real prospects for sustainable growth going forward. It would be pretty messy.
And of course, Greece needs money to be able to implement these changes, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. There's some talk about the Troika accelerating part of the funding to sort of provide stimulus for the Greek economy. But, that's sort of hearsay at this point. But you're right. Further retrenchment is just going to undercut Greek growth going forward, and it's going to make the debt levels even more unsustainable than they already are.
So in terms of the UK, I mean, we're not part of the euro. How much of an impact does this have on us? Of course, people do talk about contagion and the problems spreading to other countries, but how much are we exposed, if you like, to Greek debt?
So the UK isn't actually exposed to Greek debt, per se, that significantly through its banking sector. But if Greece were to default, then you could imagine Ireland looking at Greece and thinking, well, we could go through a few more years of really painful austerity, or we could do what Greece has done, and we could default, clear the decks, and return to growth. And the UK banks have significant exposure to Irish bank debt. So if that were the case, the UK would be significantly hit. Furthermore, the UK, in the wake of the global financial crisis, is hoping to rebalance its economy away from financial services and towards exports. But the great majority of UK exports are going to the Eurozone. So the UK really does need to pay attention and care about what's happening these days in the Eurozone.
I mean, plenty of Eurozone countries have had to put in spending cuts to rein back on spending. But where has Greece in particular gone wrong, do you think?
I think Greece went wrong before these spending cuts were implemented. It has been spending beyond its means for at least a decade. If you look at the current account deficit alone going back, Greece has just been borrowing money to fund its spending. And so between that and between sort of unreliable statistical reporting, there are a number of deficits, current account deficit, but a credibility deficit in the Greek government as well. And so, the Greece has been forced to implement really harsh austerity measures, but it's really been sort of self-defeating in terms of trying to bring debt levels into a sustainable region.
Well, you're watching BBC News. Megan Green will be back with you in just a moment. Mariam Mashiri from our business department asking the questions there. We are still in Athens live with the vote of confidence in the Greek government having been passed as expected, although you never know, but it was passed just in the last 10 minutes or so by 155 votes to 143. They needed 151, a simple majority. And that is the scene outside the Parliament, around 7,000 people gathered there. You will have seen the security police at some point in some of the shots as Mariam was talking to Megan, Megan Green, thank you very much indeed. We will move on from that, in fact, but excuse me, thank you for that. And there you see, in fact, on the right-hand side of the shot, the